Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt with another entry on representations of disability in Hollywood films. Today I'll say a few words about Rhonda Haines' Children of a Lesser God from 1986. I'm going to begin today's discussion of film by talking about literature. Big surprise, right? This time I have the very best of excuses. The title of Rhonda Haines' Children of a Lesser God and the Tony Award-winning play on which the film was based was inspired by the last in a sequence of blank verse poems about King Arthur, written by the Victorian poet Alfred Tennyson. Tennyson, the poet laureate of Great Britain during much of the Victorian period, published a series of stories about Arthur between 1859 and 1885, poetic tales drawn together under the title Idylls of the King. Tennyson toys with his readers' expectations when he selects this particular title for his collection. As it turns out, few of these tales are actually idyllic. Though set against a pastoral backdrop like a traditional idyll, a gathering sense of loss and sadness overwhelms the expected occasional glimpses of rustic happiness. The final tale in the series, The Passing of Arthur, takes place after that splintering of the Round Table which followed Guinevere's affair with Lancelot, and captures Arthur's melancholy abandonment of a nation he had attempted to improve by modeling moral excellence. Right before his final confrontation with Mordred, a battle in which the king will be seriously wounded, the usually stoic Arthur breaks down in the privacy of his tent and questions the meaning of life. Arthur wonders why the glory he finds in nature has not managed to shape human relations. Why is there so much conflict? Is God to blame, or does the problem lie with humanity's imperfect understanding of itself? The king opens his loud lament with these words: I found him in the shining of the stars. I marked him in the flowering of his fields, but in his ways with men I find him not. I waged his wars, and now I pass and die. Oh me, for why is all around us here as if some lesser God had made the world, but had not forced to shape it as he would, till the high God behold it from beyond, and enter it and make it beautiful? Or else, as if the world were wholly fair, but that these eyes of men are dense and dim, and have not power to see it as it is. The king declares that the presence of God is unmistakable whenever he gazes into the night sky or breathes in the beauty of spring. These things unequivocally bless humanity. When he considers, however, how little human behavior has been shaped by God's intervention and examines the consequences of the violence he himself has waged in God's name, he questions the beauty of the created order. It seems like some lesser God, one incapable of doing things the right way, had been tasked with taking the first inept shot at shaping the world. Presumably, only after his failure has played itself out will the one true high God step in and set things right. At least, Arthur muses that's one way of looking at human experience. Another involves the possibility that we just don't see things correctly. Maybe what we consider faulty because unexpected and uncomfortable are things that have an important role to play in a larger divine design we cannot comprehend. What if the unexpected variability, which challenges our assumptions about normality, comfort, beauty, and goodness, is an absolutely necessary part of human experience, not an aberration to be stamped out or rewritten? The two incompatible outlooks considered by King Arthur echo humanity's fractured reaction to all sorts of unanticipated, exceptional developments throughout recorded history, including our irreconcilable responses to the disability in our midst. The pervasive medical model of disability hangs on the utilitarian assumption that everyone is best served by policies that benefit an able-bodied majority, a premise that sidesteps the inevitability of a disabling condition for everyone who lives long enough. This view recommends medical intervention whenever possible in efforts to move those with disabilities towards a supposed average. According to this model, disability lies primarily within the uncorrected body. The social model of disability, by contrast, holds to King Arthur's second possibility that perhaps we're not looking at the human situation correctly. This viewpoint posits that it is narrow-minded people and inaccessible environments that together disable the individual who has a physical or cognitive difference. What others consider merely an impairment might become, for some people with extraordinary differences, an important and valued part of their identity, which they don't want fixed. The best known examples of this can be found in members of the deaf community who spurn cochlear implants, but similarly proud ownership of disabling conditions can be found among those with mental illnesses, mobility challenges, and vision impairments. This disunity between social and medical models of disability echoes the clashing perspectives of the central characters in Rhonda Haines' first feature film, Children of a Lesser God. Sarah and James represent opposing sides in an ongoing debate about the degree to which an able-bodied individual and someone with a disability should accommodate each other. Sarah relies on sign language and has no wish to learn the lip reading and talking, which would make it easier to communicate with James. While James has built a successful career teaching deaf students the very skills which Sarah disdains. And as he freely admits, his sign language skills have grown rusty because he hasn't chosen to improve them. The issue lying at the heart of this fictional relationship complicates most relationships in the real world, assuming they last. If I break my leg, for instance, should my decision between using crutches or zipping around in a motorized wheelchair be determined by what's easiest for the able-bodied friend with whom I take long walks every Saturday morning? Or should they be quick to suggest an alternative activity that doesn't even require mobility? Should an aging person with faulty hearing start using a hearing aid at the first sign of trouble, improving the device's effectiveness over time? Or is it more important that the hearing person in such a relationship make an effort to position themselves in front of their partner and raise their voice so that lip reading combines with increased volume to assist their companion? Presented with such choices, many of us will suggest that both individuals should do what they can to accommodate one another. Surely any relationship, romantic or otherwise, benefits from shared effort and sacrifice? If only thousands of years of ingrained ableist bias did not stand ready to trip us in our rush towards such an egalitarian ethos. Throughout history, those crippled by disease or injury have been forced by circumstance to beg on street corners. Individuals infected with leprosy, who often end up with mobility impairments when untreated, have been corralled into leper colonies, even though the disease does not spread by touch, and 95% of the population is genetically immune to it. The ancient Greeks' abandonment of disabled children to the ravages of the wilderness finds its modern equivalent in the elimination of fetuses that testing suggests might carry chromosomal disorders or neural tube defects. The sterilizing of American citizens with cognitive disabilities in the 20th century can be traced back through eugenics to Francis Galton and other like-minded Victorian scientists who held that reproduction should be encouraged only in the most physically fit. In the second half of the 19th century, educational reform largely eliminated the use of American Sign Language in public schools, so-called oralists arguing that manualism, the use of sign language, discouraged social unity. There are outliers, to be sure. Ancient Mesopotamia used the principle of honor to encourage family care of the sick and disabled, and the book of Hebrews recommends social as well as spiritual recalibration when its author writes, "Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. In the 1790s, innovator William Tuke replaced the use of physical restraints in mental asylums with personalized treatment plans which taught self-control. And decades later, French physician Edouard Seguin demonstrated that children with the most profound cognitive disabilities could make reliable distinctions among different colors and numbers when caregivers chose to approach them with patience and compassion. For every progressive exception, however, there are hundreds of precedents pushing us in the opposite direction. Not all are easy to spot. It takes little effort to condemn violent ableism that takes the shape of a shooting in a retirement home, or a Nazi Holocaust that wipes out hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities. But what about those more subtle choices we regularly make when allocating funding for education, transportation, and online education? Do state and local policies force those with disabilities to fight hard for every ADA-enabled right won by activists back in 1990? Do we elect public officials interested in financing accessible public transportation and special needs programs in our schools? When we design a new building, install a crosswalk, or post a video on YouTube, do we heed the author of Hebrews and create environments that accommodate, or those that further disable? Do we instinctively reserve space for elevators and ramps in our blueprints, add accessible pedestrian signals at intersections, and create grammatically correct closed captioning for videos we post online? When we communicate with a member of the deaf community, do we expect them to read our lips, or do we work at polishing our own ASL? Do we seek forms of connection and communication that empower both parties? Or is our actual goal the absorption of minority experiences into a greater homogeneous whole? These last questions return us to Rhonda Haines' film, the first of two to star William Hurt as a self-assured, single-minded professional resistant to rethinking the way he approaches his impaired clientele. In The Doctor, released 5 years later, Hurt plays a surgeon whose approach to treating cancer shifts radically once he becomes a patient himself. In Children of a Lesser God, he's an itinerant communications instructor, moving from one deaf school to another to hawk his sought-after wares, teaching those with significant hearing losses how to lip read, enjoy music and dance to it, and speak intelligible English. His creative approach, which wins over most of his students, pairs absurd fun with a relentless conviction that members of the deaf community will achieve greater personal and professional success once they learn to communicate effectively with hearing people. One of his students isn't buying what he's selling, an important exception that reminds the viewer there's no single appropriate response to disability issues. The school custodian, Sarah, also adopts this adverse posture towards James' instruction. In her first on-screen role, Marlee Matlin plays a woman comfortable remaining part of the deaf community, who thinks James' emphasis on assimilation presumptuous. Her intelligent character clearly wants more than a janitorial position at her alma mater, but she questions the tools James touts as necessary to rise higher. Like the actor who plays her, Sarah does not wish to neglect the deaf community in order to pursue success. She embraces sign language as a critical part of her identity. The film prompts us to ask whether one of these perspectives is more practical than the other. Should those with disabilities attempt to get in line with everyone else? Or should the able-bodied do what they can to minimize the disabling consequences of physical differences? Do we need to see differently, as Tennyson's King Arthur suggests? Or do we believe that those with disabilities were created by a lesser God, that their differences, that is, are a mistake?